Hello, welcome to the GS Digital Intervention Program for Senior High Schools. Today we have English language and we are dealing with comprehension. The topic is tackling comprehension questions. This is lesson number 6 and the lesson title is Types of Comprehension Questions. I'm your facilitator, Foster Owusuche. Now, for starters, let's look at this. I'm going to give you a series of activities to do. And you are going to look for the answers and tell me whether you are going to use skimming or scanning to do those activities. So the first one is what you have on the screen. Two, to search for a program on TV, what will you do? What will you use, skimming or scanning? The next activity is looking through search results. Write down if you skim or scan for this activity. Then if you are to look through a Facebook to see what is going on, what will you do? Will you scan or skim? If you're looking for a piece of information in a book, are you going to skim or scan? I hope you were able to find answers to these simple questions based on what we learned the previous lesson. Now for today's learning outcome, you will identify different types of comprehension questions. Explain the different types of comprehension questions. And finally, you make an attempt to answer different types of comprehension questions. Now remember that for every comprehension passage, there are varieties of questions set for the student to answer. So it's going to be a combination of these questions. And it will all depend on what the examiner wants from you. Remember that in most cases, all the questions are compulsory. And again, a combination of the type of questions may be said to determine your understanding of the reader. Let's take a look at some types of comprehension questions. First, we start with literal or factual questions. Literal or factual. And these questions are normally based or focused on testing the storyline. So what is the story about? 2, it may aim at testing the context in the story. Now, remember that the answers can be found directly from the passage. You don't need to go outside the passage to get this type of answers to the questions. Then we can take a look at technique questions. One may ask, what do we mean by technique questions? And these questions examine the style of the author. So it may aim at, for example, the tone of the author. And let's look at some of these. The tone of the author may be gloomy, sad, mysterious in that way. It may be humorous. And the question may be, how do you see the author in this work? Some of these may also, the style may be personal. He talks about himself and he puts in his own ideas and influences the story. Another aim of the author may show that he is angry, for example, at certain things that he abhors. Sometimes The author may also be neutral. Now look at another thing we are going to focus on. Questions on the writer's intended purpose. What does he intend to do? And these type of questions are focused on, one, the language and the style of the author. So what is the language? The language flowery? The language full of proverbs and other things? Then, diction and the word choice is also very important. Every author chooses particular words to suit a particular passage. Then, the writer's intended purpose may also be for the audience. Look at what is given for the audience. Now, questions on the writer's purpose. Why does the writer produce this piece of work? Sometimes most of these work are produced for entertainment. So, if you read, a question may be asked on the purpose. Is it for explanation purposes? You read certain articles and they explain how things are done, especially in the expository work. Some writers purposely write to condemn. Do you see any elements of condemnation in the passage that you read? Others purposely write to just ridicule, laugh at people, laugh at ourselves, as we have in satires and other pieces of work. Then the writer may write to criticize. They'll ask you a question. What are the sort of criticisms that you get in the passage? Now we come to a set of different questions, and these questions are what we call the interpretative or inferential questions. Note that they are different from the factual question in so many respects. Then we have contextual questions. Now the inferential questions. These type of questions are more demanding. They are not like the ordinary type of questions. They are more demanding. Again, you see that if there are 5 questions or 10 questions, the questions that attract higher marks are the interpretative or inferential questions because they are more difficult to tackle. And the reader has to infer beyond what is written in order to get answers to those questions. For example, if a writer says, when they returned from the farm, the chicken had gone to roost. You have to infer at what time they returned to the farm. You have to infer that chicken normally go to roost before dusk, and therefore that was the time they returned from the farm. And again, respondents are normally asked to draw conclusions in interpretative end. From your own point of view, what do you think the author is trying to put across? You have to draw your own conclusions. Let's look at contextual questions. These questions are recoverable from the text. And sometimes they can be quoted directly from the text. You don't have to go outside the text to get the answers. And most of these questions are preceded by when, what to do, who, what, and the rest. Another set of questions we can deal with is what we call derivative questions. And in this type of questions, you need to digest the information very, very well. You don't easily arrive at this type of answers easily. And you have to make a lot of implied deductions and interpretations before you can get answers to these type of questions. Appreciative questions. Apart from what we've discussed, this type of question require a higher skill to deal with. Sometimes you have to react to the language and structure. And questions on the attitude of the author may be asked. What is the attitude of the author towards this character and the rest? Now, we've looked at a lot of these questions. Remember what I told you from the beginning, that questions will be asked based on these structures. And different type of questions will be asked in any examination that you come across. But let's take a reflection or the plenary session of what we talk about. Remember that today we talk about literal or factual questions, answers easily obtained from the passage. We talk about technique questions. We also talk about the writer's intended purpose. What is it that he wants to do? What is he trying to put across? In addition to that, we also tried to answer questions on the writer's purpose. What was he writing for? Then, on the interpretative and inferential questions, you remember we said these are more difficult to answer and they get more marks than the usual. Then we have contextual questions from which we can easily get the answer. Derivative questions are more difficult and it's a different plane. So if you are tackling any comprehension questions, you must know that if you find one more difficult, jump to the next one, because one may be interpretative, which demands more time. The other may be literal or factual. So you answer the simple ones first, and you have more time to do the others. Appreciative questions normally will demand more. So if you read and you come to appreciative questions, you know what to go about it. Now, thank you very much for this session, and we hope to see you